He was only 4 months old, but for days he refused to move from that drain, as if his whole world was trapped beneath it. Snow clung to his white fur in frozen clumps, his tiny body shaking against the bite of the Minneapolis wind. The street was almost empty, the kind of cold that keeps people indoors. Yet there he sat, pressed close to the storm grate, eyes locked on the darkness below, like his life depended on it. I was halfway back to my truck with a bag of groceries when I saw him. My boots crunched over the ice, and I slowed, frowning. People passed him without a second glance. A man in a thick parka stopped just long enough to take a photo before walking away. A woman stepped around him, muttering, "Poor thing," but never bending down. No one touched him. No one asked why he was there. I took a step closer, my voice low. "Hey, buddy." His ears twitched, but his gaze never broke from the grate. Then I heard it, a sound so faint I thought I imagined it. A thin, muffled whimper rising from the shadows beneath the bars. My stomach tightened. I crouched, leaning over the icy metal, but the black gap swallowed the light. The sound came again, sharper now, and Norbert shifted as if to shield it from me. Snowflakes stung my cheeks, the wind howling between houses, but the puppy stayed rooted, tail curled tight under him. I caught the faintest flicker of movement in the dark, pale fur, trembling. Another puppy. My chest tightened with the kind of urgency you can't ignore. Norbert looked up at me then, his eyes wide and wet, flicking between me and the grate, begging without a sound. The whimper from below broke again, weaker, more desperate. If we didn't get that grate open soon, whatever was down there wouldn't survive the night. I moved slowly, crouching until my knees scraped the frozen concrete. "It's okay, boy. I'm here." My breath clouded between us, but Norbert didn't flinch. His muscles were tight, ready to spring, but not to run away, only to guard. He glanced down at the grate again, and the whimper rose from the darkness like a thread pulling at my chest. I eased a hand forward, palm open, letting him smell me. His nose twitched, but his eyes never softened. He wasn't afraid of me. He was afraid of losing what was down there. The wind whipped harder, snow biting into my face, and my fingers burned from the cold. Minneapolis winters don't forgive mistakes, and every second felt heavier. "Who's down there, huh?" I whispered. He blinked slowly, then gave a sharp, urgent bark toward the grate, like he was answering me. The sound from below, fainter now, came again, a pitiful cry that made the back of my throat ache. I shifted to the side, peering through the bars, but all I saw was darkness. The opening was narrow, the steel slick with ice, the smell of damp concrete rising up in little clouds of frozen breath. The thought hit me hard. If another puppy was trapped down there, the cold and wet would finish the job long before nightfall. Norbert stepped closer to the grate, pawing at it with frantic little scrapes. His nails clicked against the metal, echoing down into the drain. I could almost hear the tiny answer from below, like they were speaking in their own language. I swallowed hard, feeling the urgency rise in my chest. This wasn't something I could walk away from. Not with that look in his eyes, not with the snow piling higher around us. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket, my fingers stiff, and dialed for help. Whatever was down there, it needed saving. The dispatcher's voice crackled in my ear, calm and distant, like we weren't talking about life or death. "Sir, can you confirm this is an animal in a storm drain?" I pressed my glove tighter to the phone, shielding it from the wind. "It's a puppy. And there's another one trapped down there. They're freezing. We don't have hours." She promised to send a unit, but her tone told me this wasn't their priority. I hung up, staring at the grate Keithana, and felt that old frustration claw at me. The same one I'd felt as a boy when my German Shepherd Rex had dragged a half-drowned kitten out of a ditch. Animals protect each other without question. People? We hesitate. Norbert hadn't moved an inch. His breath rose in quick puffs, frosting the fur around his muzzle. Every few seconds, he'd lean forward, pressing his nose against the ice-cold steel, then glance toward me like he was making sure I wasn't leaving. The sound from below had faded to a faint rhythmic whine, weak but still there. I looked up and down the street. The sun was blinding against the snow, but the sidewalks were nearly empty. A man across the road slowed to watch, then kept walking. My hands clenched inside my gloves. How many days had this puppy been sitting here? How many people had walked past him, heard that cry, and done nothing? The minutes felt longer in the cold. I shifted my weight. stamping my boots to keep the blood moving, and kept my eyes on Norbert. He didn't care about the temperature. He didn't care about himself. Every muscle, every breath was anchored to the life below. Somewhere far down the street, I saw the slow flash of hazard lights. The police were coming, but I knew, just from the look on Norbert's face, that they weren't coming fast enough. They didn't sound like they were in a hurry. The cruiser rolled to a stop a few feet from us, tires crunching over the ice. 2 officers stepped out, bundled in thick jackets, their breath hanging in the air. One of them glanced at Norbert, then at me, his brows pulling together. "You're the caller?" "That's him," I said, nodding toward the white German Shepherd puppy. "He's been here for days. There's another one trapped down there, still alive." They approached the grate, boots squealing on the frozen pavement. One officer crouched and peered inside, his flashlight beam bouncing off wet concrete. Can't see much, just shadows. He reached out and tapped the bars with his gloved hand, and Norbert immediately stepped between them, planting himself like a wall. The other officer gave a short laugh. "Protective little guy?" But his tone shifted when the faint whimper floated up from below. "Okay, there's something down there." They knelt beside the grate, pulling at the edges, but the steel didn't budge. Ice had locked it tight to the frame, years of rust holding it like cement. One officer straightened, shaking his head. "It's just a dog, sir. We can't shut down the street for this." The words hit me like a slap. My jaw tightened. "It's not just a dog. He's been sitting here in the cold for days, protecting someone who can't protect themselves." The wind whipped through the street, carrying that desperate little cry again. Higher now? Like the pup below knew help was close. Norbert pressed his body against the grate, paws scraping at the metal, tail trembling. One officer sighed, rubbing his gloved hands together. "We'll need tools to get this open." I stepped closer, voice low but sharp. "Then get them, because if we wait much longer..." I glanced at Norbert, then back to the dark slit in the street. The whimper from below broke into a weak, shuddering cry that froze all of us in place. One of the officers jogged back to the cruiser to call in for equipment, leaving me with the other, who knelt again, gripping the frozen bars. Norbert paced in a tight circle, whining low in his throat, then returned to paw at the grate like sheer willpower could rip it open. The officer tried again, bracing his boots against the pavement, but the metal didn't move, not even a fraction. "It's welded by ice," he muttered. "We're gonna need a crowbar." I scanned the street, desperate. Across the road, a group of 3 teenagers had stopped, their breath puffing in the cold. One held up a phone, filming. "Hey," I called out, "any of you have something, anything, to pry this up?" They shrugged, one of them laughing under his scarf. None of them moved closer. My chest burned. Not from the cold, but from the sting of how easy it was for people to watch without helping. Norbert didn't care who was watching. He lowered his head, nose pressed to the ice, and let out a sound so raw it cut right through me. I crouched beside him, rubbing his neck. "Hang on, buddy. We're not leaving him down there." The officer from the cruiser returned, a heavy crowbar in hand. He wedged it under the lip of the grate, the metal screaming against the frozen seal. Inch by inch, it shifted, flakes of rust and ice breaking free. Norbert's tail twitched wildly, his body tense with anticipation, and then just enough space opened for light to spill into the darkness. My heart thudded as I leaned over. In the shadows, curled into a trembling ball, was a small husky puppy, white and gray fur matted with ice. His eyes blinked against the sudden light, but he didn't move. Snowy. He had to be Snowy. The whimper that rose from him then wasn't just fear, it was relief. And Norbert, standing above, answered with a sharp, urgent bark that seemed to say, "I told you he was here." The officer dropped to his knees, sliding his gloved hands carefully through the narrow opening. "Easy, little guy. I've got you," he murmured. Snowy didn't fight. He was too cold, too weak. His tiny chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, his fur clinging to the officer's gloves as he lifted him free from the shadows. The moment Snowy cleared the grate, Norbert lunged forward, not to run, but to smother him in frantic licks. He pressed his nose into the husky puppy's fur, circling him, whining like a worried parent, counting each breath. Snowy shivered violently, his paws stiff, but the way his eyes flickered at Norbert's touch told me everything. This was why Norbert hadn't left. This was the life he'd been guarding. The officer stood, holding Snowy for a moment before wrapping him in a thin blanket from the cruiser. "Another night out here," he said quietly, and he wouldn't have made it. I reached out, letting Snowy rest in my arms. He was lighter than I expected, like holding a bundle of sticks under that fur. His nose was icy, but when Norbert leaned in close, Snowy's eyelids fluttered as if he'd finally found safe ground. For the first time, Norbert's tail gave a small, shaky wag. Just once, but it was there. Hope. The wind still bit at our faces, but the air felt different now. Less like a warning, more like a push to move fast. We had 2 lives to get warm. The officers exchanged a glance, one of them nodding toward the cruiser. "Let's get them to the shelter. They can treat hypothermia better there." Norbert trotted after us as we walked, never more than an inch from Snowy's side. Every few steps, he'd glance up at me, his eyes saying what words couldn't. "Don't let him out of your sight." We bundled them into the back of the shelter van, the heater blasting warm air that smelled faintly of coffee and wool blankets. The driver, a young woman in a thick red parka, glanced at the 2 puppies and shook her head. They're lucky someone called when they did. Snowy was wrapped tight in a fleece blanket, his body still trembling in short bursts. Norbert climbed in beside him without hesitation, curling his own body around the smaller pup like a living shield. He didn't close his eyes, not once, just kept watching Snowy's face as if willing him to stay awake. I sat across from them, holding the edge of Snowy's blanket to keep it tucked around him. My gloves were damp from melting snow, but I didn't care. In the hum of the engine, I could hear Snowy's breathing, uneven but steady. Every now and then, Norbert would press his nose to Snowy's ear, as if counting the seconds between breaths. When we reached the shelter, the warmth inside hit us like a wave. A vet tech hurried over, scooping Snowy into her arms, her tone brisk but gentle. "We'll get him on fluids and warmed up right away." Norbert tried to follow, but another staff member stepped in front of him. His paws skidded against the tile, a low whine rumbling in his throat. I crouched down, placing a hand on his chest. "Easy, boy. They're helping him." The shelter smelled of hay and disinfectant, the air filled with the faint sounds of other animals, a bark here, a rustle there. Norbert's ears swiveled, but his focus kept snapping back toward the hallway Snowy had disappeared into. A staff member approached with a clipboard. "We'll need your information for the report, and you can visit tomorrow once the little one's stable." I nodded, signing the forms with a stiff hand. As I turned back, I caught Norbert sitting in the middle of the lobby, his head turned toward the hallway, refusing to look anywhere else. In that moment, I knew I'd be back here tomorrow, because there was no way I was letting him wait alone. The next morning, the snow was still coming down in slow, heavy flakes when I pulled my coat on. Kitty was at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "You're going back for them," she said softly, not as a question, but as a fact. I nodded, grabbing my gloves. "Snowy made it through the night. I can't leave Norbert there wondering." She set her mug down and stood, pulling on her own coat. "Then I'm coming too." Kitty had always had that quiet strength about her, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be certain. When we walked into the shelter, Norbert was already at the front of his kennel, ears forward the second he saw me. His white fur was clean now, brushed out so it shimmered under the overhead lights. But his eyes, those hadn't changed. They were still scanning for Snowy. Kitty crouched beside the kennel, smiling softly. "Hi, sweetheart." Norbert sniffed her hand through the bars, then glanced back toward the hall, tail giving one tentative wag. It was the first time I'd seen him acknowledge anyone besides me since the rescue. The vet tech led us down the hall to Snowy's recovery room. The husky puppy was lying on a warm pad, hooked to fluids, a soft blanket tucked up to his chin. His eyes lit up when he saw us, really lit up, and Norbert pressed against the doorframe, straining it closer. "Careful," the tech said, opening the gate. Norbert patted in slowly, then lowered his head to nudge Snowy's cheek. Snowy's tail tapped weakly against the blanket. The room felt warmer than the heat lamps could account for. Kitty's hand found mine. "They belong together," she whispered. I looked down at the 2 of them, one guarding, one recovering, and felt something settle in my chest. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment the decision started to take root. Later that afternoon, as we were getting ready to leave, the shelter director called us into her office. Papers were stacked high on her desk, and a bulletin board behind her was filled with photos of adopted pets. She smiled politely but got straight to the point. Both puppies have adoption interest. Multiple families have applied for them. I felt a sudden weight in my chest. Together? I asked, though I already knew the answer. She shook her head. No, separate homes. We usually can't guarantee bonded animals go as a pair, especially when they're not siblings. I glanced at Kitty, her lips pressed into a thin line, the way they did when she was holding back what she really wanted to say. They survived because of each other, she told the director. Splitting them up now. She didn't finish the sentence. In the kennels, Norbert was pacing, his ears flicking toward any sound from Snowy's direction. Snowy, still recovering, would lift his head every time Norbert barked, his eyes scanning until they locked on his friend. I leaned on the kennel door, speaking low so only Kitty could hear. After everything, how could we let them be torn apart? My voice cracked, and I hated that it did. They've been through enough. Kitty squeezed my arm. Then we don't let it happen. We walked back to the office, the sound of Norbert's paws echoing faintly behind us. I looked the director straight in the eye. What would it take for us to take them both? She hesitated, glancing at the file in her hands. Well, there are already applications ahead of yours. I can't promise anything, but I'd made up my mind. Even if I had to fight through a wall of red tape, I wasn't leaving here without both of them. The next morning, Kitty and I were back at the shelter before it even opened. The air was sharp with cold, our breath curling into the early light. We stood outside the glass doors, watching the staff move inside, my stomach tight like I was waiting for a verdict in a courtroom. When the director finally let us in, she motioned toward a bench in the lobby. "Give me a few minutes," she said, her expression unreadable. Norbert spotted us from his kennel and let out a sharp bark, pawing at the gate. Down the hall, I caught a glimpse of Snowy lifting his head from his blanket. My hands clenched together, restless. Minutes dragged. I thought about all the people who'd passed Norbert on that street, the cold in Snowy's tiny body, the way they'd leaned into each other the second they were reunited. Losing that now would undo everything they'd fought through to survive. The sound of footsteps snapped my attention back. The director was holding a thin folder, her face still neutral. "If you're sure you can take both," she said, "and you understand the medical follow-ups they'll need, they're yours." I felt Kitty's hand grab mine, hard. The breath I'd been holding broke out in a shaky laugh. "We're sure." The staff led us to the kennels, and the moment those gates swung open, two blurs of white fur barreled toward us. Norbert charging ahead, Snowy a half step behind, his tail finally wagging with real energy. They hit my legs like a wave, paws scrambling, eyes bright. I knelt down, letting them climb into my arms, Snowy's head tucking under my chin, while Norbert pressed against my chest like he was afraid to let go. "We're going home," I whispered, and for the first time since that frozen street, both puppies were warm. The drive home felt like a scene I didn't want to end. Kitty sat in the back seat with both puppies curled against her. Norbert stretched protectively along Snowy's side. The heater filled the truck with soft warmth, but it was the steady rhythm of their breathing that made everything feel right. When we pulled into the driveway, the sun was dipping low, casting golden light across the snow-covered yard. Norbert bounded out first, nose to the ground, tail high, circling the space like he was mapping every inch. Snowy followed more slowly, his paws pressing tiny prints into the fresh snow, his eyes wide with curiosity. Inside, the fire in the living room was already crackling. Kitty spread a thick blanket near the hearth, and the puppies settled without hesitation. Norbert curling into a half moon around Snowy, who rested his head on Norbert's front paws. I sank into the armchair across from them, watching the flames dance over their fur. "I thought I was saving them," I said quietly, my voice almost lost under the pop of the firewood. "Turns out, they were saving me." Kitty smiled from the sofa, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "That's how it works, isn't it?" Norbert's eyes drifted closed first, his breathing deep and slow. Snowy shifted once, pressing closer, and let out a soft sigh that seemed to empty the last of the cold from his bones. In that quiet, with the snow falling outside and their warmth filling the room, it felt like the world had finally righted itself. For the first time in days, there was no rush, no fear, only the simple, unshakable truth that they were home, and they were safe. Some stories stay with you because they change how you see the world. Watching Norbert, a German Shepherd puppy, guard that storm drain for days just to keep a husky puppy alive, I realized something we should never forget. Dogs never betray. They love without conditions. They protect without question. And they stay even when the rest of the world walks away. This wasn't just a dog rescue. It was a lesson in loyalty, in the kind of courage that comes in small, shivering bodies with hearts too big for their size. Norbert didn't care about the cold, the hunger, or the danger. He only cared that Snowy made it out alive, and Snowy, in turn, trusted him with everything. If you ever wonder whether compassion matters, remember this: most people walked past that drain, but one call, one act, one choice to stop, that saved 2 lives. And maybe, by sharing this, you'll help save more. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. Every share, every comment, every person who sees Norbert and Snowy's story helps spread the truth about what it means to stand by someone, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4. Dogs like Norbert and Snowy are why Brave Paws exists. They remind us that we can be better. We can be the ones who don't turn away. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope. He was just sitting there, still, quiet, half covered in snow, right outside the McDonald's on Flatbush Avenue. People walked past like he wasn't even real. Some barely missed stepping on his tail. A few kids pointed, one even laughed, but no one stopped. Not one adult, not one family. Not until Cameron did. "Dad," he said, tugging my sleeve. "Do you see him?" I turned, and that's when I saw the puppy, solid black, not a patch of color anywhere on him, like he'd been dipped in charcoal. His fur was soaked from the melting snow under him, his ribs were just barely visible through his frame, and he didn't flinch when a car honked nearby. He didn't move at all. It was a Sunday, our only day off, and we just pulled into the lot to grab lunch together. My wife, Heather, had barely taken off her seatbelt when Cameron spotted him. The pup sat pressed against the wall, right by the door where the warm air pushed out every time someone opened it. No collar. No tags, no leash, just a small black shadow melting into the street. We stood there for a few seconds, the 3 of us, watching, trying to figure out where he'd come from, if he belonged to someone. Maybe someone was inside, just grabbing food. But the longer we watched, the clearer it became. He was alone. Cameron didn't ask for permission. He just walked up with his burger and crouched slowly in front of the pup. I followed, expecting the dog to run, but he didn't. He didn't even lift his head until the smell hit him. That's when I saw his eyes, green, the color of broken glass lit by morning sun. I'd never seen a dog with eyes like that. Not just the color, but the way they looked through you. Like he was asking without asking, "Are you the one, or are you just going to keep walking?" He took the burger gently. No growl, no tail wag, no fear. Just a slow bite, and then another. Like each chew was measured against hope. Heather stepped beside me, arms crossed tight against the wind. "What do we do?" she asked softly. I didn't have an answer. I went back to the car, grabbed one of our reusable coffee cups, and filled it with water from inside the McDonald's. Cameron held it steady while the pup drank. He lapped at it like he hadn't seen water in days. When he finished, he curled right back into his spot, shoulders tight, nose tucked, tail wrapped to keep his paws warm. We couldn't take him. Not like that. What if he had a family? What if he was just lost? Heather said we should wait, see if anyone came for him. We stayed for nearly an hour. Nobody came. When we drove off, Cameron kept twisting in his seat to look back. "What if he's still there tonight?" he asked. I didn't know what to say. I didn't even know what to feel. But I'll tell you this. I couldn't stop thinking about those green eyes the whole ride home. Neither could Heather. And Cameron? Well, he didn't say much after that. Just stared out the window, quiet. That night, we watched Marley and Me together. Not on purpose. It just came on. Heather cried. I did too, though I'd never admit it. But Cameron, he didn't just cry. He held my arm the way he did when he was a little boy and said, "That dog waited too." I didn't sleep well. And judging by the way Cameron came down the stairs already wearing his jacket the next morning, neither did he. Cameron came downstairs already wearing his winter jacket, hood up, gloves on, and that determined look on his face he usually saved for game day. He didn't say good morning. He didn't ask if we were going back. He just stood by the front door with his shoes in one hand and the other on the doorknob, waiting. Heather and I exchanged a glance over our coffee mugs. No words, just that quiet understanding you only get after years together. I finished the last sip, stood up, and grabbed my keys. We drove through fresh snow that hadn't yet been ruined by tires and boots. Brooklyn was still waking up. The sun was low, golden behind the buildings, casting long, cold shadows across the sidewalks. My chest felt tight the closer we got. I told myself not to expect anything. He could be gone. Picked up, run off, taken. But Cameron sat forward in his seat the whole time, eyes scanning the sidewalks, hoping. We turned the corner onto Flatbush and pulled into the same parking lot. The McDonald's looked the same, steam from the vents, early rush of customers, workers in heavy coats clutching hot drinks. Then I saw him. He was still there. Same spot. But now, he was lying down, curled tight in a ball. Snow had covered part of his back overnight. His nose was tucked into his front leg, and he didn't lift his head this time, not even when the car door opened. Cameron jumped out and ran. "Flint," he called softly, like the name had always been his. The puppy didn't move. For a second, my stomach dropped. Then I saw his ear twitch, a slow blink. He was alive, but only just. Heather came up behind me, hand over her mouth. We didn't wait. I opened the trunk and pulled out the emergency blanket from under the toolbox. Cameron knelt beside him, whispering something I couldn't hear. When I reached them, Flint's eyes were open, unfocused, blinking slow. As I hit, his breathing was shallow. Cameron slid his arms underneath, and I wrapped him tight in the blanket. No resistance, no fight, just a soft exhale, like he was giving in, not to death, but to trust. We placed him in the back seat, turned the heat up full, and headed straight for the nearest vet we could find on the map. The whole ride there, Cameron sat beside him, one hand on his back, the other holding his phone in case we needed directions. But he didn't play music. He didn't talk. He just watched Flint breathe. The vet's office was warm, bright, smelled like antiseptic and peanut butter treats. The assistant took one look at us, at Flint, and waved us through. "No collar, no chip," she said, scanning him twice. "Thin, dehydrated, but stable." Cameron asked, "Did someone report him missing?" She shook her head. Nothing matching this description. We thanked her and left with a temporary form and instructions for rest, hydration, and follow-up. Cameron wouldn't let me carry Flint. He held him all the way to the truck. But we weren't done. Heather insisted we do this right, so we drove to the nearest shelter, one the vet recommended. Clean place, friendly faces. A young woman met us at the counter, and when she saw the bundle in Cameron's arms, her whole posture softened. "Another one," she asked gently. "What's his name?" Cameron looked up at me. "Flint," I said. She smiled. "We'll check for reports and hold a file in case someone comes forward, but this doesn't look like a dog someone's looking for." We stood there in silence for a moment. "Do you want to surrender him?" she asked. Heather looked at me. I looked at Cameron. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He just said, "I think he already chose us." We didn't say much on the way home. Flint was wrapped in a blanket in Cameron's arms, tucked against his chest like a newborn. Every few minutes, Heather would glance back from the passenger seat to check on them, and I'd catch her hand resting on her heart without her even noticing. At home, we cleared a space by the fireplace and laid down old towels and pillows. Cameron refused to put Flint in the laundry room or garage. "He's not a stray," he said quietly. "He's family now." And somehow it didn't feel like a kid's wishful thinking. It felt true, like we were all just catching up to what Flint already knew. He slept most of that first day, barely moved except to shift when the fire crackled too loud or when Cameron whispered to him. Cameron sat next to him for hours, not on his phone, not watching TV, just holding space, being present in a way most adults forget how to be. We gave him small amounts of food and water at intervals, like the vet instructed. Every time, he looked up before eating, as if to say thank you without needing words. That night, I checked on them one last time before going to bed. Cameron was asleep on the couch, one arm draped over Flint like a shield. Flint had his head resting on Cameron's ribs, breathing slow, eyes closed but not fully relaxed, like he still wasn't sure this was real. The next morning, Flint stood up on his own. He walked slowly to the back door. Cameron opened it, and Flint stepped outside into the snow-covered yard. He stood there for a moment, nose lifted, taking in the cold, clean air. Then he turned and looked back at us like he was asking, "Is it really okay? Is this mine?" Heather started crying right then and there. I didn't blame her. Over the next few days, Flint's energy started to come back. He followed Cameron everywhere, upstairs, downstairs, room to room. The sound of his paws on the hardwood became part of the rhythm of our house. He didn't bark much, barely made a sound, but his presence filled the space. Heather and I tried not to talk about how fast we were getting attached. We were still waiting to hear back from the shelter, just in case someone out there had been looking for him. But deep down, I think we all knew. Cameron made a bed for him in his room. But most nights, Flint curled up right on the rug by the window, watching, listening, guarding something invisible. And in the mornings, Cameron didn't need an alarm clock anymore. He had a soft nose pushing his hand, green eyes staring up, tail thumping once or twice like a secret between them. He named him Flint officially that week, said it was because he survived the cold and still sparked something in us. I didn't argue. It was perfect. Flint settled into our lives like he'd always belonged there. Not in a loud or demanding way, he was quiet, almost cautious, as if still testing the boundaries of safety. But he was present in every corner of our home. When Heather cooked, he'd curl beside the fridge. When I read the paper on Sunday mornings, he'd lay across my feet. When Cameron practiced free throws in the driveway, Flint would sit at the edge of the court, head tilted, following every bounce like it was the most important thing in the world. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after we brought him home, Cameron invited me out to shoot hoops. That wasn't unusual. We'd always bonded over basketball. But this time, Flint followed us, tail wagging low, ears perked, eyes shining with that gentle alertness we were coming to love. We started passing the ball. Cameron dribbled, juked me left, then right, laughing the whole time. Flint sat at the side, watching. Then Cameron missed a shot and the ball rolled across the yard. Flint bolted after it, not in a chaotic, goofy puppy way, but focused, driven. He stopped it with his chest, nudged it with his nose, then pawed at it until he managed to push it back to Cameron. Cameron gasped. "Did you see that?" he shouted. "He passed it back." I laughed. Beginner's luck. Flint did it again, and again, each time a little better, until, by the end of the hour, we weren't just playing basketball, we were playing with Flint. He wasn't just watching anymore, he was part of it. Heather came out to take pictures. Later that night, she showed me one of the shots. Cameron mid-laugh, Flint mid-leap, snowflakes in the air. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Something about that image grabbed me by the chest, maybe because it looked like hope, maybe because it looked like healing. We still hadn't heard anything from the shelter. No chip. No lost dog posters. No one called. No one asked. Part of me was angry about that. Who could lose a dog like this and not search the city? And if he'd been dumped, if someone had left him outside a fast food joint in the dead of winter, how could they sleep at night? How could anyone? I never said that out loud, but it lived behind my ribs. Instead, we focused on Flint's recovery. His coat grew shinier, he filled out, his steps became bouncier, more confident, and he started to trust, truly trust. Not just tolerate us, but seek us out. He'd press his head against our legs, sit at the foot of Cameron's bed, ears alert, eyes watching him sleep. Once, when Heather had a headache and lay down on the couch, he climbed up carefully and placed his chin on her chest, not moving for an hour. She said the pain faded faster than any medicine. That was the thing about Flint. He didn't just take space. He gave it back. Warmer, quieter, kinder. And in return, we gave him everything we had. A few weeks later, we got a call from the shelter. Cameron answered, and I could see his body tense before he handed me the phone. I took it with a pit in my stomach. But it wasn't what I feared. The woman on the line, same one who helped us that first day, said they were organizing a weekend adoption event. Nothing huge, just a community gathering, food trucks, music, some tents, and a way to highlight successful adoptions. We were wondering, she said, if Flint would come back, not to stay, just to show people what's possible. I looked at him lying by the window, nose resting on his paws, those green eyes lifting to meet mine like he already knew what the call was about. "He'll be there," I said. Saturday came, and the three of us drove to the park. Flint sat in the back seat like he belonged to the world now, not just us. His fur was sleek, his eyes alert, and the little white patch of snow on his muzzle from weeks before had long since faded, replaced with warmth. People came up one by one. Kids asked to pet him. Adults asked his story. Heather shared the photo by the basketball hoop. Cameron told them how Flint helped him through the hardest part of winter. I watched my son speak to strangers with pride in his voice and light in his eyes. It hit me then. This wasn't just about rescuing a dog. It was about watching a boy become something more. Flint never left Cameron's side. Even when music played and people crowded close, he stayed right next to him, tail low and calm, eyes always scanning. And when a gust of wind knocked over one of the signs and it clattered loudly to the ground, Flint didn't bolt. He stepped in front of Cameron, head raised, still but protective, just in case. That night, after the event, we sat around the dinner table, plates empty, hearts full. "Do you think he remembers?" Cameron asked. "Remembers what?" I said. "Before. The snow. The people walking past. Us leaving him there." I paused. "I think he remembers enough," I said. "But not the way we do. Not in pain. I think he remembers it as the place he waited until we came back." Heather reached over and took my hand. "Maybe that's what love is," she whispered, "coming back." And from under the table, Flint pressed his head gently against my knee. Spring came early that year. The snow melted fast, revealing sidewalks littered with salt stains and new grass trying to break through the frostbitten ground. Cameron started leaving the back door open when he got home from school, and Flint took it as an open invitation to patrol the yard like it was his personal kingdom. He'd circle the fence line, sniff every corner, then return to the porch to rest his chin on the steps and watch the street as if waiting for someone specific to walk by. One afternoon, I got home early from the port. The cranes were shut down for maintenance, which almost never happened, and I wasn't about to waste it. Cameron was outside shooting hoops. I stood at the window for a moment, just watching. His rhythm was smoother now, stronger, and there was Flint, right beside him, nudging the ball whenever it rolled his way, tail wagging, occasionally barking once when Cameron made a shot like he was keeping score. I walked out and leaned against the fence. 2-on-1? I asked. Cameron grinned, "Only if you're ready to lose." We played for an hour, laughed like we hadn't in months. Flint darted between us like a referee, eyes bright, tongue out, soaking in every second. When I finally dropped onto the porch, winded, Cameron sat beside me and Flint flopped across both our legs like he owned them. There was a peace in that moment I hadn't felt in years. Later that week, Heather took Flint to the vet for his final round of vaccinations. The receptionist asked her if she'd like to add a note to the adoption board, a little card with Flint's photo and the words "Forever Home" printed in bold letters. Heather hesitated at first. Then she wrote, "Found in the snow outside a McDonald's. Now lives like a king. Adopt. Don't look away." She showed me the photo later. Flint's head was tilted, ears perked, green eyes shining like they always did when he was focused on Cameron. I asked if we could frame it. One night, around the same time, Cameron had a school project about defining family. He came to the kitchen table with a notebook, sat down, and wrote quietly for almost an hour. Then he read it to us. "Family is the people who show up. Not always the ones you expect, but the ones who stay. The ones who see you, even when you're sitting in the snow and no one else stops. Family is what Flint gave back to us." Heather cried. I didn't. Not then. But when I walked Flint that night, I looked up at the sky and thought about what it meant that a black puppy with no name and no home had brought so much back to a boy, a mother, and a man who hadn't known he was drifting. Flint tugged gently on the leash, leading us forward. Always forward. Like he knew exactly where we were going, said, even when we didn't. Summer crept in slowly, warming the sidewalks and softening the evenings. The days stretched longer, and Flint adjusted like he'd been waiting for the sun all along. He'd find the warmest patch of light in the living room and sprawl across it, legs kicked out, belly exposed, completely at peace. Sometimes, when the breeze picked up and the curtains shifted just right, I'd catch him lifting his nose, eyes half closed like he was remembering something soft and far away. Cameron signed up for a summer basketball league. Twice a week, evening practices down at the local rec center. Every time we pulled into the parking lot, Flint would jump up from the back seat, tail thumping, ready to watch. He wasn't allowed inside, of course, but he sat patiently near the fence, eyes locked on the court, following Cameron's every move like a proud parent. One evening, after practice, Cameron walked over and knelt beside him. "You're my good luck charm. You know that?" he said. Flint licked his cheek once, then dropped his head into Cameron's lap like it was exactly where he belonged. The next day, Cameron got invited to play in a tournament game. Big crowd, bright lights, real refs. He was nervous, more than he'd admit. He paced around the house before we left, bouncing the ball off the floor, fidgeting with his laces. Flint followed him, step for step, finally placing himself right in Cameron's path and sitting down, staring up. Cameron stopped, looked into those green eyes, and said, "You think I got this?" Flint wagged once. They rode in the back together that night, Cameron's arm slung around his neck like an anchor. When we got there, Cameron leaned close and whispered something in Flint's ear. I don't know what he said, but when he stepped out of the car, his nerves seemed to settle. He played better than I'd ever seen him play. Fast, focused, fearless. And when the final shot left his hands and sank through the net at the buzzer, the whole place roared. Cameron turned, scanned the crowd, and didn't look for us. He looked straight toward the parking lot, where Flint sat behind the chain-link fence, tail sweeping the grass. When the game ended, kids surrounded him. High fives, praise. One of the other dads leaned over to me and said, "That boy's got fire. Where'd he learn that?" I looked at Flint, still sitting tall, eyes glowing. "From his brother," I said. That night, as we pulled into the driveway, Cameron unbuckled his seatbelt and didn't move. "Dad?" he asked. "Yeah? Can we get Flint a tag?" I turned in my seat. "What kind of tag?" "You know, a real one that says he belongs here." We got it the next day. Silver, simple, round. It read, "Flint, Brooklyn, Enwafound. Loved, forever." And when I clipped it onto his collar, it made the faintest sound, like a key finally turning in the right lock. We took Flint to the beach that weekend. It wasn't part of some grand plan. We were just driving along the coast, windows down, wind in our hair, and Cameron asked, "Think Flint's ever seen the ocean?" Heather smiled. "Let's find out." The sand was still warm from the afternoon sun, and the waves rolled in soft and slow, brushing against the shore like a lullaby. We let Flint off the leash once we found a quiet stretch. He paused, sniffed the air, then trotted forward, cautiously at first. The wind tousled his ears, seagulls cried overhead, and then it hit him. The smell, the salt, the freedom. He bolted. Not away from us, never that, but in wild, looping circles across the sand. His paws kicked up clouds, his tail curled in pure joy, and Cameron chased after him, laughing so hard he couldn't breathe. Flint stopped at the water's edge, stared at the surf, then leapt forward as the tide rolled in. It startled him, and he jumped back, barking for the first time in days. A real bark, loud, playful, alive. Cameron ran up beside him, shoes in one hand, pants rolled up, and together they danced in the foam like two kids discovering magic. I stood next to Heather and watched them, arms around her waist, heart heavy in the best way, because I remembered the boy who barely smiled back in January, the one who asked why no one stopped, the one who whispered Flint's name like a prayer. Now he was glowing. And Flint, he was more than glowing. He was shining, a black silhouette against a golden sky, eyes wild with life, tongue lolling, legs strong. Heather nudged me. "We needed him more than we knew," she said. I nodded. He reminded us how to feel again. On the way home, Cameron curled up in the back seat, Flint's head in his lap. They both dozed off before we hit the bridge. Heather looked back and smiled, reaching for my hand. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. At home, Cameron carried Flint up the stairs like he weighed nothing. They collapsed into bed together, a tangle of limbs and trust. Flint's collar clinked softly as he turned once, twice, then sighed and went still. Later that night, I walked into Cameron's room to check on them. The moonlight spilled across the floor, catching the shine of Flint's tag. I knelt beside him and ran my hand down his back. "You saved my boy," I whispered. And I swear, in that still, quiet moment, he knew exactly what I meant. It was a Sunday morning when it happened. One of those heavy summer days where the sky hangs low and thick and everything moves a little slower. Heather had gone out for groceries, I was fixing a broken cabinet hinge in the kitchen, and Cameron was in the backyard practicing free throws. I remember the thump of the basketball, the bounce, the rhythm. It was background music by now. Then I heard a yelp. Short, sharp, cut off too fast. I dropped the screwdriver and bolted outside. Cameron was already halfway across the yard, sprinting toward the side gate where the old latch had never quite locked right. The ball was rolling aimlessly in the grass. The gate was wide open, and Flint was gone. My heart punched the inside of my chest. I looked up and down the alley beyond the fence. No sign of him, just stillness. Cameron turned to me, panic rising in his voice. "Dad, he was right here. I don't know what happened. I looked down for a second. It's okay," I said, though my voice cracked. "We'll find him." We grabbed our bikes and split up. I went north, Cameron south. I called Heather and told her to come home. The three of us searched for hours, blocks, parks, alleys. We asked dog walkers, delivery drivers, the guy selling hot dogs outside the gas station. No one had seen a black German Shepherd puppy. No green eyes, no silver tag. The sun started to dip, and still nothing. My legs ached, my hands were shaking. All I could see were the images I didn't want to see. Him darting into traffic, confused, scared. Him lying somewhere alone, waiting. Again. Heather finally made me go home. "He's smart," she said. "He knows this place. Maybe he'll come back." But Flint didn't come back that night. Cameron didn't eat, didn't speak. He sat by the back door with the leash in his hands and the blanket Flint always slept on folded neatly across his lap. I stood in the hallway watching him, my chest tight, my mouth dry. I hadn't felt that kind of helplessness since the day he was born, when they wheeled Heather into surgery and told me to wait. The next morning, I printed flyers. We stapled them to every pole, slid them under every gate. I called every shelter, every vet clinic, every emergency line. I left my number so many times it didn't sound like a real sequence anymore. By afternoon, silence was all we had. Then, around 6 p.m., my phone rang. It was the hardware store clerk, 2 blocks from McDonald's. She said a black puppy had walked into the alley behind the loading dock. Thin, panting, looking around like he recognized something but didn't know where to go. I dropped the phone. Cameron was already at the door. Heather grabbed her keys. We didn't even lock the house. We drove like the city was on fire. The clerk waited for us out back, pointing toward the shadows behind a dumpster. And there he was, covered in dirt, one paw scraped raw, breathing fast but still standing, still watching, still waiting. Cameron stepped forward first. "Flint," he whispered, and Flint moved, wobbly, weak, but straight into Cameron's arms, tail wagging, head pressing into his chest like he was trying to disappear into the safest place he knew. We brought him home again that night. This time, we didn't let him out of our sight, not even for a second, and when Cameron finally fell asleep, Flint curled up on top of his chest like he'd never left. Flint didn't let Cameron out of his sight for days after that. If he went to the bathroom, Flint waited outside the door. If he went to the fridge, Flint followed. If he sat on the porch, Flint pressed against his leg like a shadow. It wasn't anxious. It was something deeper. A quiet promise. I lost you once. I won't let it happen again. Cameron didn't seem to mind. He'd ruffle Flint's ears, talk to him like a person, sometimes even whisper things when he thought no one was listening. I heard him once through the cracked door. "You're my best friend, you know that?" And then I heard Flint's tag jingle as he leaned in closer. We replaced the latch on the side gate the next morning. I drilled it in myself, tighter than it had ever been. Then I walked the whole fence line, top to bottom, checking every post, every board. Heather watched me from the window, arms crossed, a look on her face like she wanted to cry but wouldn't let herself. That evening, Cameron came down the stairs with a marker in one hand and Flint's tag in the other. "It needs something else," he said. I raised an eyebrow, and he showed me. He'd drawn a tiny heart just beneath the word forever. Barely visible, but there. Quiet. Permanent. A few days later, the shelter called again. Not for an emergency, but for something else. They were launching a youth program, pairing kids with rescued dogs for weekend visits, short walks, reading sessions. They said Flint's story had inspired the idea, and they wanted to invite Cameron to be part of the launch. Heather lit up, but Cameron hesitated. What would I even say? I knelt in front of him. "You don't have to say anything big, just tell them the truth." He nodded. "Okay, but Flint's coming too, right?" "Front row," I said. The day of the event, the shelter set up a small stage outside. A few folding chairs, some colorful banners, and a big print of Flint's adoption photo hanging from a stand near the podium. Flint sat beside Cameron the whole time, calm as ever, head high, tail brushing the ground every so often like a metronome of trust. When Cameron was introduced, he stood up slowly, took a deep breath, then walked to the microphone with Flint right beside him. He looked out at the crowd, maybe 20 people, mostly kids and volunteers, and said, "I don't really like talking in front of people, but I wanted to say, Flint didn't just change my life. He gave me someone to show up for, every day. And I think that's what love is, showing up even when it's hard." There was a long pause. No one moved. Then someone clapped and another. And then the whole group was cheering. Not loudly, not wildly, but with that kind of warmth that seeps in under your skin and stays there. That night, Cameron sat on the couch with Flint curled into his side and a certificate from the shelter in his hand. He traced the letters with his finger. "First time I ever got an award for just caring," he said. "You didn't just care," I told him. "You listened, you stayed, you saved him." Cameron looked down at Flint. "No," he said softly. "He saved me too." The end of summer came slower than we expected. The light changed first, less golden, more pale. The breeze shifted too, tugging at the trees like a quiet reminder that everything moves forward, no matter how much we want to hold it still. Cameron started school again, taller somehow, older in the way he carried his backpack and looked people in the eye. But every afternoon when he came home, there was Flint, waiting by the window, ears alert, that tail sweeping the floor the second the front door clicked open. They had a routine now. Homework first, then basketball. Then a long walk around the block, just the two of them. Sometimes I followed at a distance, just to watch. There was something sacred in it. Flint trotting alongside, head held proud. Cameron talking low, probably telling him about his day, his teachers, the kid who annoyed him in math class. Flint never broke stride. He listened like it mattered. One Saturday morning, I found Cameron in the garage rummaging through old boxes. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "A crate. Not for locking him in, just for when we travel. I want to take him with us this year, when we go to Vermont," I smiled. "Already thinking ahead, huh?" He nodded. "He's part of us now. Wherever we go, he goes." That afternoon, we packed a picnic and drove to Prospect Park. Flint had a new harness, Cameron's idea, black with silver trim, his name stitched on the side. He wore it like a badge of honor, head high, tail lifted, every step confident but calm. We spread out under a big oak tree near the water. Flint curled at our feet, his eyes half-lidded in the sun. Heather laid her head on my shoulder. "He's made us better," she said quietly. "All of us." I didn't answer right away. I was watching Cameron, who had pulled out an old Polaroid camera and was snapping photos of the lake, of the grass, of Flint sprawled in the shade. "Do you think he remembers it?" I asked. "That day at McDonald's. The cold. The snow." Cameron looked up. "I think he remembers we came back." That night, after dinner, we lit a small fire in the backyard. Cameron roasted marshmallows while Flint sat beside him, staring into the flames like he understood what fire meant, what it could take, and what it could warm. As the stars came out, Cameron leaned against me, blanket wrapped around his shoulders, Flint's head resting on his lap. "Dad," he said, "when I grow up, I think I want to work with dogs, like rescues or training, something real." "You'd be good at it," I said. "They trust you." He nodded slowly. "I think Flint taught me how." I looked at my son, the boy who once froze in silence at the sight of pain, now glowing with purpose and kindness. And I looked at Flint, the black pup with green eyes who'd waited in the snow for someone to see him. And I knew without a doubt they'd saved each other. It started with a phone call, the same shelter that had first welcomed Flint weeks ago, the one where Cameron gave his speech, called again. This time, not with a request, but with an invitation. They were launching a new outreach program at a nearby children's rehabilitation center. Kids recovering from surgeries, long-term illnesses, trauma. Some of them didn't speak much. Some hadn't smiled in weeks. The center had tried everything: music, art, animals. "We remembered Flint," the coordinator said. "And Cameron, we think maybe they'd like to come visit, just once. No pressure." Cameron said yes without even looking at me. "If Flint's allowed, we're going." The center was bright but quiet, walls painted in soft colors, Sunlight poured through tall windows. Flint walked in gently, leash loose in Cameron's hand. His steps slowed as they entered the main room. He seemed to sense something. A gravity. A stillness. One girl sat curled in a chair by the window, a four-line taped gently to her arm, gaze fixed on nothing. A boy lay on a mat, his legs braced, hands motionless. A toddler with a scar down her neck stared wide-eyed from behind a toy cart. Nurses moved softly between beds, smiles carefully shaped. Flint didn't bark, didn't rush. He looked around the room once, and then walked directly toward the boy on the mat. He didn't lick, didn't jump. He just laid down, front paws out, head on his paws, so close their shoulders almost touched. The boy didn't move, but 5 minutes later his hand slid an inch, then another, until finally it rested on Flint's back. The whole room paused. A nurse exhaled, whispered, "That's the first time." Next came the girl by the window. Flint walked slowly toward her and sat. Just sat. Her hand trembled as she reached out. When she touched his ear, she flinched like it might break him. But he leaned in, pressing gently into her palm. Her lips parted. "Soft," she whispered. We came back the next week. Then again. Flint seemed to know which kids needed him most, the ones who looked away, the ones who turned their faces to the wall. He'd lie near them, sometimes without making contact, just being there until they turned back. Cameron started keeping a journal. He wrote down the names of every child Flint connected with, what time they smiled, what they said, if anything, how they looked before and after. One entry read, "Her name was Elsie. She had burns. She didn't want to pet him. Flint just laid next to her for 23 minutes. When he left, she said, 'I hope he comes back.'" At home, Flint was still our dog, still the one who chased basketballs and laid his head in Cameron's lap and barked at squirrels from the window. But he was more now. Not just ours. One night after another visit, Cameron came into the kitchen with Flint curled up at his feet. He looked older somehow, taller. "I think Flint knows," Stusky said. "Knows what?" I asked. "That he was meant for this. For them, for me, for all of it." And I couldn't argue. Because some stories don't end with rescue. Some begin there. A few weeks later, the center called again. This time, it wasn't just an invitation. It was a question. "There's a little boy," the woman said softly. "His name is Leo. He hasn't spoken in 4 months. We've tried everything. He barely moves. But yesterday, when one of the nurses showed him a picture of Flint, he smiled." That was all Cameron needed to hear. We went the next morning. Leo was 5 years old. Small, pale, with curls that had grown wild from being in bed too long. He lay curled on his side, blanket up to his chin, eyes wide but distant. The room was filled with silence, a silence that didn't want to be broken. Cameron walked in first, Flint at his heel. He didn't say anything, just slowly crossed the room, sat down in the corner, and patted the floor once. Flint lay down, quiet as a shadow. Leo's eyes moved, just a little, toward the dog, toward Cameron, then stopped, passed, then 10. Flint didn't move. Cameron stayed still too, legs crossed, hands in his lap. At minute 12, Leo blinked and whispered, barely audible, "Doggy!" The nurse gasped. I saw her hand fly to her mouth. Flint lifted his head gently, ears up, but he didn't move closer. He waited. Cameron looked over at me, his eyes wide, shining. "Do you want to pet him?" Leo didn't answer, but his fingers crept above the blanket, slowly, shakily, toward the edge of the bed. Flint stood, took 2 soft steps, rested his chin on the mattress without making a sound. Leo's fingers found his ear. That was the first touch. A week later, Flint and Cameron returned. Leo was sitting up by then, holding a small plastic basketball in his lap. When he saw them come through the door, he grinned. This time, he said Flint's name. This time, he threw the ball, and Flint brought it back, over and over. Until Leo laughed, really laughed, and the sound cracked something open in that room that had been sealed too long. Afterward, the therapist approached Cameron. "You should know," she said, "some kids don't respond to years of treatment, but they respond to animals, to dogs like Flint. You're healing more than you realize." That night at home, Cameron opened his journal and wrote a sentence in big, bold letters. Flint doesn't just remember being saved. He remembers how it feels, and now he's giving that feeling away. Heather framed that page. It hangs in the hallway by our front door. Every time we leave, we walk past it. Every time we come home, we see it again. And every time, I think the same thing. This dog, who once sat freezing in the snow while people walk past, has become someone the world can't walk past anymore. Last week, the center held a ceremony. Nothing big, just close friends, families, a few staff members, and a group of kids whose lives had been quietly changed. They called it the Circle of Hope. Each child who had made a meaningful breakthrough got to bring something that helped them heal. Most brought drawings. A couple brought siblings. Leo brought Flint. We arrived early. Cameron wore a button-down shirt he kept tugging at. Flint had his harness on, polished tag glinting in the light. There were chairs set in a circle around a small platform, and in the center sat a sign that read, "Healing comes in many forms." One by one, families shared their stories. A girl who spoke again after months of silence. A boy who took his first steps with a therapy dog by his side. Parents held tissues, staff wiped their eyes, and when it was Leo's turn, he didn't wait to be called. He walked right up, tiny sneakers padding across the wooden floor, and said into the microphone, "I was sad." And then Flint came. Now I'm not scared of being sad anymore. Flint stepped up beside him like it was choreographed. Leo wrapped his arms around his neck, and the entire room fell still. Afterward, the director approached us. She handed Cameron a small certificate with gold edges and neat handwriting. Flint, therapy dog in training, status honorary. Cameron beamed. Does this mean he's official now? The director smiled. He was official the moment he chose to stay beside someone. We drove home in silence, the kind that feels warm. Flint laid his head on Cameron's lap, tail thumping with every bump in the road. When we pulled into the driveway, Heather stepped out with a surprise. New custom tags just delivered. One was for his harness, Brave Paws Volunteer. The other, Family, Forever. Cameron clipped them on, then pulled Flint close. "I think he's more than a dog now," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "He's a beginning," Cameron said, "for everyone he meets." That night, I sat alone on the porch, watching the stars blink awake. Flint joined me, resting his head on my knee, like always. I looked down at him, this once-abandoned puppy who had waited in the snow for someone to come back, who had found a boy, a family, a mission. And I whispered, "Thank you." Because some rescues don't just save a life, they light the way for countless others. And Flint, he became our light.